Scooby-Dooby-Doo, where are you? We have some work to do now.
Hey Epic people, it's Epic here. Well, it's been about 3 months since my last devlog. Yada yada, life and work and holidays all got in the way of doing any real game design stuff, but we're back. This time though, the project looks a bit different from last time, and that's because I restarted the whole thing at the end of December.
You what?
Yup, all 10 previous devlogs on the channel, technically null and void. Well, kinda. Not really. It is what it is. You might be wondering how I ended up here again. I really looked at my game project and I was all like,
I got this! I got this!
Get him up, let him get up, let him get up, let him get up.
I got this!
there were some parts I understood, parts I completely forgot, and a bunch of errors I just couldn't fix anymore. On top of that, the plugin I was using had systems running in the background that were actively getting in my way, even when I wasn't using them. Now to be fair, if I actually committed to learning the advanced turn-based tile toolkit inside and out, maybe I could have avoided some of those problems, but that's not what happened, okay? The difference this time is that I wasn't starting from zero. I already understood how the plugin worked conceptually, so I could rebuild the systems I actually needed without all the stuff I didn't. The biggest problem I had with the plugin was that the entire map became a grid battlefield during combat. What I actually needed was something more localized. Only a small area around the player and the nearby enemies should become grid active when combat starts. I can't really be upset about that though. The features that I was using were experimental and not guaranteed to work the way that I needed them to. I still learned a lot from it. It just wasn't the right long-term solution. So the first thing I needed was a way to define where combat happens. Once I could place down a battlefield area, I needed a way to build tiles dynamically inside it. That's where my grid chunk system came in. Instead of generating one massive grid for the entire world, the map is divided into chunks, each chunk being a 16 by 16 section of tiles. These chunks exist all over the map, but they don't all do anything at once. When combat starts, only the chunks surrounding the player are activated and asked to display their tiles. What this means is that I never have to worry about where combat starts, whether I'm in a forest, a town, hell, McDonald's place. The system just grabs the nearby chunks and builds a battlefield automatically. It also keeps performance in check, since I'm never spawning more tiles than I actually need. Once I started working, I added the more important features, making the tiles conform to the shape of the landscape. Tiles trace down to the terrain, so combat actually respects elevation instead of being a flat board slapped onto the top of the world. But obviously that opens up another problem. What if combat starts next to a cliff or somewhere that just wouldn't make sense to fight? To handle that, I made a simple box actor that acts as a combat override. Any tiles inside that box gets disabled during combat. This lets me block off areas where I never want combat to happen without having to design the entire level around the grid system. Later on, when I'm doing proper level design, this is going to save me a ton of time. Next up was enemies. Since I already did this in the previous project, it was mostly recreating the same idea here and then building a lock-on system. You can now lock on to enemies, but if you're too far away, combat won't start. When combat does start, the player snaps to the nearest valid tile. That all worked fine, but it got me thinking. Obviously, the tactics combat is where most of the depth and fun will be, but I wanted the overworld gameplay to be interesting too. I took inspiration from a game I got for Christmas, and I've been loving Expedition 33. One of my favorite things about that game is the parry system during enemy attacks. That got me thinking, what if something like that existed before combat started? So my idea is this. There are two ways to enter combat. You either lock onto an enemy to initiate the fight, or the enemy attacks you first. If an enemy attacks you, what if you could time a parry, deal some damage, and start the fight with an advantage? That's something I'll explore later, but I've already laid some groundwork for it. Right now, if you collide with an enemy, both you and the enemy gets pushed back. This helps with spacing so combat doesn't start with both units right on top of each other, but it gives me a space later on to slot in a parry animation or taking damage animation. Once combat starts, I swap the player with their combat unit and switch to a top-down view, similar to the other tactics games that you can find and play. After that, I focused on how the grid communicates information. Things like occupied tiles, movement range, ranges, and skills. I ran into some issues with occupied tiles, but I really like how the old plugin handled them, so I adapted a similar approach. For movement range, instead of highlighting every tile, I focused on outlining the perimeter. That took way longer to figure out than I expected, but once I had it working, a lot of the logic became reusable for skills as well. I also made a very simple combat UI and set up the camera to sit directly behind the current active unit. I think this is way more interesting than staying top down the entire time. The camera should feel dynamic, changing based on menus, actions, and intent, not just during flashy skill animations. Once I had a working camera, I needed to make it move cleanly. I experimented with Unreal's gameplay camera system, and while it had some cool ideas, certain nodes completely broke my setup. So I built my own. Each unit now has adjustable anchor points that define where the camera sits during the unit's turn. The camera zooms in, and when you select moves, attack, or a skill, it transitions to a directional top-down view based on where the unit is facing. Originally, you could hover over tiles with your mouse, but now that's gone, and tile selection is handled with WASD instead. And that's everything I got done in January. It was a busy month, but for the first time in a while, I can actually see the finish line. Up next is pathfinding, getting units that move properly along the grid. Once that's working for the player, the AI can use the exact same system. After that, it's real combat, skills doing damage, enemies being defeated, and the core loop finally coming together. Once that's solid, I'll probably send a build to friends and families for testing and feedback. At that point, the foundation of the game is done. Everything after that is art style, polish, and content. I'm also hoping to have a Steam page up by the end of February. Honestly, I feel way more confident about this version of the project. Everything here was built by me, so I actually understand it, and I haven't been fighting constant errors. Restarting really does feel like the right call. The next devlog will be at the end of February, and hopefully I'll have some good progress to share. I'm also considering setting up a Patreon to share more behind the scenes stuff, so let me know what you think about that. But until next time, stay epic.